So, you guys know what a concept album is, right?
It's just another brick in the wall. Ever since I was a young boy, I played the silver ball. Getting better all the time.
Okay, I'm being coy. You clicked on this video. You know what a concept album is. But what you're thinking about in your head when you think about a concept album might be a kind of narrow, albeit common perspective on what a concept album can be. It is narratives that run throughout the album. It is characters who reoccur and play roles throughout the project. It is this very grand storybook idea of a concept album. Many of the most famous concept albums of all time take pretty much this exact vision. Let me cite the same examples that I used earlier. The Beatles, Sgt. Pepper, The Who's, Tommy, and perhaps most famously of all time, Pink Floyd's The Wall. This is the most common vision of a concept album that exists out there, and you can get insanely dorky with it. Progressive bands seeking to prove they can elevate their genres with a conceptual narrative that runs throughout their album, but sometimes it turns out to be pretentious, self-indulgent nonsense. See Styx, for example, or perhaps Dream Theater. Some people would even say Mars Volta, though I disagree with that one. And this idea of a concept album is something that is very much still around today. Some more relevant examples to modern music discourse being Clipping's great album, Splendor and Misery, Janelle Monáe's The ArchAndroid, and, don't hate me, but Melanie Martinez's K-12. But like most of the terms we use to describe music, a concept album is imprecise. There are plenty of other ways to make a concept album without relying on exceedingly narrative through lines tying your entire project together. And it's an interesting dichotomy that people talk about often online, and it's what I want to talk about today. Some people have taken the idea of a concept album and applied it to projects that don't fit the somewhat rigid earlier vision of conceptuality that I began this video with, but do sort of reinforce each other within their track list, songs that connect to each other and tell greater stories, even though they are not telling a literal story. Take, for example, Sly and the Family Stone's There's a Riot Going On, which is often cited as a concept album, despite lacking a lot of the more precise characteristics that one might expect. This anxiety-inducing album dabbles in a lot of different subject matter, but it all comes together to paint this picture of decaying American institutions and overwhelming burden placed on minority classes. The result is an album that fulfills in very complete fashion this vision of the death of 60s idealism unfolding in real time. In the decades since the birth of the idea of a concept album, artists have taken it and ran with it in all kinds of crazy directions. Liz Phair's Exile in Guyville, for example, is very loosely conceptual. It is famously a track-by-track response to the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street, but updating and reimagining some of its themes for a 90s female-fronted indie rock world. Beyoncé's Lemonade, often cited by many people as one of the definitive modern concept albums, does have an idea at its core, Beyoncé's marriage and Jay-Z's infidelity, but it uses that to explore all kinds of different subjects. Across the album, Beyoncé dives into her own past and the societal weight of expectations placed on her as a woman, as a black person, as a famous pop singer, and recontextualizes all of it through the lens of the infidelity that is rocking her marriage and comes out stronger on the other end as a result of all of it. And on Jasmine Sullivan's Hoe Tales, she turns the literal idea of sex itself into a concept. passing the mic off to multiple other women to give their own unique perspectives on love and lust in order to try and paint a more complete picture. Not even to dabble into the world of adaptation, where forms of other media are being turned into conceptual albums like Rosalia's El Maquier or Hermit and the Recluse's Orpheus and the Sirens.
It's hard to love, and if only God could judge, who need juries? Weighing the crime, still paying for mine, haunted by the three furies.
And it's through this more general and, again, more imprecise lens that a lot of the debate online over whether something is or is not a concept album spawns. Take, for example, Little Simz' Sometimes I Might Be Introvert, or Car Seat Headrest's Twin Fantasy, both of which you can find plenty of debate online as to whether or not they qualify as a real concept album, even though, in my opinion, they both obviously do. In fact, I would go even farther, staking my opinion as a music critic and music writer behind some even more contentious concept albums. Black Country New Road's Ants from Up There, for example, or The Avalanche's We Will Always Love You. Perhaps most controversially of all, Julia Holter's Aviary. I think I could make a pretty good case for why any of these are concept albums. But recently, these two albums dropped that I think display this dichotomy and this difference in approach perfectly. They're both coming-of-age albums. They are both told through a uniquely trans lens. They both have highly regional motifs. They're both really goddamn good albums, and yeah, they're both concept albums.
6 sections in my main. I don't want to look younger, it's just something I'm into.
Let's start with the new Underscores album, Wall Socket, because even by concept album standards, this is some dork shit. This album has 3 main characters. Their names are Sunny, Mara, and Old Money Bitch. This album has a distinct setting. It is unsurprisingly a town called Wall Socket. The vinyl version of the album even comes with this little map so you know your way around the town of Wall Socket, which is neat. Wall Socket, the album, not the town, begins with its ripping lead single Cops and Robbers, which is both a great song but also a story about a man called Joshua Domingo who steals hundreds of thousands of dollars from a local bank via embezzlement. But his story isn't just told on the album, it happens within the world of the album. Throughout the rest of the project, characters deal with the fallout of his actions and frequently discuss what he did. In the album's standout song Locals, it's referred to as the talk of the town, but the 3 main characters are largely ignoring it, using the chaos to get up to their own fun.
Baby, I'm delusional. Big practical equation. It's the talk of the town. It's the talk of the town.
Unsurprisingly, the song Old Money Bitch is about the character of the same name, or more specifically, Mara chastising her over her generational wealth. The ballad, You Don't Even Know Who I Am, is creepily paralyzing enough on its own until you discover that it's actually from Mara's perspective about stalking and ultimately breaking into the home of the album's other main character, Sunny. It adds this terrifying context to the project's isolated small town setting and the way that the characters are then forced to interact with it and with each other. Take this particularly chilling moment on the back half of the song. Today is the best day of my life. I invited myself in and wore your clothes, took your pills, cried your makeup off, and for once I felt just like you. It isn't even just the singles either, it's the entire album. Johnny 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 follows Sunny as she realizes she's being groomed by an older man, while Shoot to Kill Kill Your Darling sees that same character trying to parse the fact that one of her best friends is obsessed with joining the army. And the closing track, Good Luck Final Girl, is a quintessential small town finale for the record that sees the three girls finally able to leave Woolsocket and realizing that what happens next has to be a journey that they each take entirely on their own. And because April underscores knows that trans people like to hyperfixate, she gave us a lot to chew over. If you think you're done with Woolsocket when you finish listening to the album, you don't know underscores. This album is an entire fucking ARG with like dozens of like websites and social media profiles and hundreds of posts to scroll through that all give context and world-building information to the town of Woolsocket. The underscores subreddit has done a better job of collecting all of the information about the record than I ever could, and I highly recommend, if you like the album, giving some of it a read because it's pretty interesting. And if anybody figures out where I can spend some of this Woolsocket money, let me know. The keyword here is detail. This album has a definitive story. Unpacking it is like putting together a puzzle with pieces that each have a precise place and go together neatly to form a full story, a full concept. And God, is it a satisfying puzzle to assemble. Woolsocket is great, and it's the exact kind of indulgent experience that a lot of people expect when you use the phrase concept album, but as per the point of this whole video, it's far from the only route you can take. Jane Remover's Census Designated doesn't really have characters. Jane's a big fan of singing in first person from the perspective of other individuals. For example, the track Video is sung from the perspective of this girl who is meeting a man in real life that she originally connected with via an online chat room, and it doesn't go well. So when you listen to a song on this album, like, for example, Backseat Girl, which dabbles in abuse and manipulative relationships, it's hard to tell exactly what and how much is inspired by Jane's own lived experiences. But, like, let me ask you something. When you hear a lyric like this, a twisted body on display, you couldn't pay me to care about anything or anyone, and at my lowest I'm afraid. I never thought about the way I look when I'm on the run. Does it matter? Does the perspective Jane is singing from being her own or someone else's make this any more or any less of a beautiful and vulnerable piece of songwriting? I don't think so. This album is nowhere near as regionally precise as Woolsocket. Jane has said that the album was inspired by traveling across America for the first time, in particular the Pacific Northwest, and I can show you a map of that area, but I can't map out Census Designated. To extrapolate from that the album doesn't have a setting couldn't be a bigger mistake in my opinion. Sure, it may not take place in a named location, but can't you feel it? Can't you feel the regionality that connects all of these songs together? It isn't about street names or city governments. It's about memories, recognition, and recollection. This album doesn't really tell a story. It doesn't have characters who reoccur and develop throughout, but it certainly has reoccurring motifs. Listen closely to how often on this album Jane uses mouths and mouth imagery to create these very visceral, visual metaphors, and the songs start to feel connected. Take a lyric like this from the song Always Have, Always Will. How filthy can I get before you rip me from your chest? You take the color from my face, and I fill your bed with vomit. As a listener, you hear that, and maybe it reminds you of this refrain from Lips. I stack the hot pink and let you color my cheeks rose. Say it under my breath. I'm your nervous wreck, and I like it that way. While this album may not have easily definable, reoccurring features, these songs do connect to each other thematically, and that reinforces the album's themes, its vision, its concept. Jane did specifically call out fans for misinterpreting the lyrics on the song's title track. It's actually about being processed through the music industry, but a lot of people connected it to abuse. And with lyrics like these included on an album with a song like Video, one that has clearly and repeatedly pointed out that even the smallest reoccurring details are worth taking note of, I can't really blame listeners for making the connection. Despite a shift in focus from the meticulously crafted details of Wall Socket to much more hazy and impressionistic storytelling, I think this is also a brilliant concept album. These two records are exactly as compelling, engaging, and immersive as each other. And I think they serve as proof that neither of these approaches to making a conceptual collection of songs are wrong. Let's do a thought experiment about a version of Cops and Robbers that appears on Census Designated. Joshua Domingo is not a named character anymore, but the song is still sung directly from his point of view, and rather than details about what he's doing, Jane is going to dive into his feelings while doing it. And throughout the rest of the album, there are no characters to discuss it. There's no town it happened in, but it will have an impact on the conceptuality of the record. It's a memory, and therefore, like many of the memories on the album, would be reinforced with abstract details littered in other songs. Could that be compelling? Absolutely, even a little bit subversive, but it's not Wall Socket. Would Census Designated be a better album if it had a story, characters who reappear across the album? I don't think so. Would it be a better album if it had a map? Is this what you want, people on the internet who endlessly debate whether or not everything is a concept album? These two projects, in very different ways, are both elevating the format of an album. Their conceptuality isn't the only thing that makes them good, but it's a tool that they both deploy in very different ways. And in my opinion, they both deploy it perfectly.